Chapter 9. Grayle. I was upset because Austin had showed up at my house and had planned on living there until the mother had signed over all rights to him. She must have had her reasons for giving the baby to Austin. I could never fathom a mother doing that, but then, these were different times, and maybe she could never give the child the things two men with good incomes were able to afford. A mother I wasn't, but I had enough love and resources to never have Amy to want for anything. When we hired Stephanie, Austin had interviewed her to clean and cook for us, because of our schedules. We were rarely home together, and after leaving the office, I headed home, to a clean apartment and dinner. I rarely saw Stephanie except to notice that she was young, perhaps in her 20s, and I never thought to ask her anything besides that, or take a look at her resume, which Austin took care of, which included hiring people to maintain the apartment because it was a large investment because of its location in New York. The people who were in my life who had become an essential part of it, I knew nothing about. I wouldn't have guessed that Austin was bisexual, or that Austin would find a woman in her 20s attractive. Maybe it was my way of thinking that had nothing to do with him, that had me categorizing Caden as being too young for me as well. Right now, I wished Caden and I could have talked, and I wasn't afraid to admit that I was the type of man who would want children, and I'd wanted him to take that step with me. Yet I'd allowed Austin to block what chances I had to be happy. I knew it was late to try to reason with Caden after that announcement that he had a man, and to flaunt him in my face was insulting and disgraceful by the way he'd smacked that dude on his ass. Now that Caden knew I was a bottom, he was taunting me, because he knew how much I wanted him inside me. My main problem was, what the fuck should I do about Austin? There was something about how Austin had manipulated me time and time again, and I had let him. He liked to control a situation, and I had sat back and allowed it to go on, and I had no one to blame but myself. As I walked out the door and headed to the garage, he was behind me, and that was when he'd said that something was wrong with his SUV, and the only garage in town who fixed exotic cars and European cars was Cole's partner Keys. Once out of the house, Austin told me that he'd brought his car over to Keys, and it should be ready in a matter of hours, and would I drop him over there? I'd like to drop him somewhere all right. Out of my life. Out of my mind. Out of my home. On my drive to Keys's garage, I asked Austin, "How did you get here?" He glanced over and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I took an Uber." I knew that to be a lie, because not only did he use his middle finger to scratch his neck, but he always cleared his throat first, and Ubers were new in Nevermore, and Austin wouldn't take an Uber if his life depended on it. Therefore, someone else must have driven him here. I could be wrong, but from what I knew of Austin, I was right about my assessment of him. There were things I didn't want to admit, or wanted to close my eyes to. I'd made excuses for him, because everyone was different. I knew I could be true to my principles, because I was taught to be forthright with the person I'd entered into an agreement with. However, after I'd turned away from Austin and declared that I loved Caden, I couldn't turn away from Cade just like that. I knew I would have to prove to him that he was my one and only. I hoped Cade would realize it too, because there could be no other one for me. But when Amy arrives, I'll have a baby to care for, and how will that affect our relationship? I wondered. Nearing Coffee, Tea and Thee, I drove past Caden's storefront looking for a parking space, and there were hardly any. I didn't say a word to Austin on our drive around the corner to Keys's shop. When I dropped Austin off, I drove around and stopped and had a drink at the local bar. I had known the guy since we were in high school, and now I handled his business account. I drank 2 scotch and waters before heading to Coffee, Tea and Thee. I'd hoped Austin would go to my home and just stay put, so I'd have time to talk to Caden, but I was sure he'd thought this out and he wasn't ready to let go of me, even as he'd signed papers giving me rights to his baby girl if we married. I wanted a child, and so I flew to New York last week, and married him all in one day. Now that it was done, it appeared he had something else on his mind when he'd showed up here, and I didn't know what that was. Leaving the bar and my car parked at the only available parking spot, I placed my hands in my pockets and strolled around to Caden's place, and it seemed that I wasn't alone, because it appeared that every college student I passed was on their way there or leaving. From the students' conversations about his shop and how inexpensive the coffee and tea was and the unbelievable pastries, they were already making plans to put coffee, tea, and thee on their schedules. When I strolled into Caden's shop, there were lines forming of students taking late-night classes. I wondered if he knew what this meant, because I did. He would never have time for me. I stood around and looked over the crowd, because I was taller than most of the people inside, and that was when I spotted Brian talking to two men. I wanted to see Brian and let him know that he had competition, and fuck what he or anyone thought. Finally, I made my way through a throng of young men and women who were sitting, chatting, and watching a large flat screen. I stood behind Brian. Brian. Before he turned around, he said, "Excuse me, Tony and Parker," and he turned to face me and his smile fell. It was tightly packed in the open room, and there was another area where I saw another space, decorated with sofas and chairs. It was welcoming to young adults, and in that room it was occupied with guys and girls wearing fatigues, who appeared to be like-minded. They were laughing, talking, and trading stories while showing off tattoos and wounds. "Brian, I don't want to take you away from your guests, but I think you should know that Caden is mine." Brian turned to the men he was talking to before I'd interrupted with my jealous rant. For some reason, I had controlled my feelings for so long that they had stayed hidden, and I had become like a volcano when the pressure became too intense and everything I'd been holding inside me overflowed, and I stood there, a man of my age, accosting another man over a man I'd chased away. I had no right to say those things to Brian, and I wouldn't have been surprised if in front of his friends he'd told me to go fuck myself, and then I would have to tuck tail and leave or stand my ground. However, not today and not at Caden's store, and to my surprise, the younger man saved my ass. The young blonde man said to the handsome dark-haired guy wearing sleeves of tattoos, "See baby, we guys are all the same, we love to mark our territory and go for it. There's nothing wrong with the way I took control and told your family and your wife that you were mine. I was just marking my territory like that guy is doing now. He has that same look in his eyes, the way you do when men look at me. Parker baby, you don't know what's in that man's mind by just the eyes." I'd been so engrossed in what the husband, Parker, had said that I'd forgotten about Brian standing with a noticeable smirk, all the while never saying a word. He probably didn't have much to say, because he was where I wanted to be with Caden. Brian had gotten the love pat on the ass that I thought Caden would give me the day I invited him to spend the night with me. But now look at me, accosting Brian about Cade and marrying Austin. Too fucked up to believe that a man my age would be caught up in my own unbelievable foolhardiness. He reminds me of you when you realized how much you wanted. Quiet, Parker, there are children here. Parker glanced at his watch. Then they should be home like our babies are. Isn't it 10 o'clock? He glanced around. I'm going to check and see if the sitter has put them in bed. Parker took a step and then turned to the man with the tan. What time is it in Tucson, baby? That fucking time zone shit. He placed his hand over his mouth, is messing with my body and mind. Parker leaned and kissed the handsome man with the deep tan, then headed for a room that wasn't occupied yet. It was the reading room. Parker slumped down in the chair as his husband's eyes followed his movement, and he appeared to be conscious of it, because Parker's hips swayed more than usual. Then he looked over and locked eyes with his husband, slid his tongue over his top lip, pulled his phone from his pocket and called someone. This is my friend Tony and his husband sitting over there. His name is Parker, Brian said. I was surprised he'd introduced me. Tony, this is Grayle. He's an attorney who you may need in the future. We nodded at each other, because it wasn't clear how I felt about Tony, or he felt about me. But his husband was okay with me. Tony appeared to be a little too uptight, and did I hear that he'd been married before and to a woman? He was bisexual. I didn't understand it because I'd always been attracted to men. Now I knew two bisexuals, Austin and Tony. Brian shook his head and laughed. He was laughing at me. Look, Grayle, I only went along with Caden because I knew he loved you, and he was having problems with you and your partner. Austin's no longer my partner. I couldn't say that he was my husband now, because that wasn't the agreement. I'm Grayle's husband, if anyone is interested. I heard that pompous voice of Austin, and I turned my body, and took a step away from him. Standing on the side was Austin, grinning and trying to place his arms around me. I gave him a look that he'd never seen from me, and hopefully I'd never have to offer that to anyone again. He'd wiped my confident, inviting smile off my face. Austin turned to Tony and extended his hand. Tony slanted his head, observing, before he took it in a handshake. I'm Tony Paisano, and this is Brian, my business partner, and my husband Parker is somewhere in here. I'm Austin, and that tall, good-looking man standing there is my husband. The store was clearing out because it was getting to closing time, and the only ones sitting, eating, drinking, and watching television were the students from the college, and they appeared to be camping inside until the place closed. Now you could hear almost every word and see everyone if you were standing at the right location. At that moment, I wanted to grab Austin by his expensive designer jacket and Tom Ford jeans, and drag him out of Caden's shop and tell him not to come back again and never to call me his husband. When he began spouting off that he was my husband in every other word in front of everyone, then I knew it wouldn't be easy to get rid of him. He had lied to me before, and I wondered what other lie he had cooked up for me now. Then Parker showed up to save the day. Who are you, and why are you looking at my man like that? He put his hand over his chest. He's not looking at me. He has his husband there, Tony said, feeling a little too uncomfortable. I know a flirt when I see one, and I can tell you now that I don't like you. Parker reminded me of Caden with his young, outspoken self. I wondered what he'd done to get a straight man to marry him. It's time to leave, Tony. We have a long day ahead of us. Tony and I are planning homes in this area for wounded veterans. And the new Wounded Inc. location is almost ready. Everyone is invited, except you. He stared at Austin after pointing his finger. That wiped the smile from Austin's face in a hurry. Parker doesn't mean that, Tony said, and he grabbed Parker's hand lovingly and headed for the door. Tony couldn't walk fast enough, and Parker slowed so their footsteps would appear even, but Parker turned every time they slowed and looked back, narrowing his eyes. Parker sensed something, and he wasn't taking any chances with Austin, even if he had complete confidence in Tony's devotion and love. Parker's instincts must have told him that Austin was a dangerous man to have around, and I felt the same. It was then I spotted Caden standing with an older couple, just chatting away. He reminded me of when I first saw him standing behind an ice cream counter. I smiled and stared, and then gave him the smile I'd saved for only him. I wanted something to get his attention, and I had to remember that I used to flirt. I hadn't done that in years, and I hoped I didn't come across as a dirty old man trying to pick up a younger guy. Hell, he was only 22 and not the 25 I wanted to believe, to help me rationalize the differences in our age. I'd had an idea that he wasn't as old as he'd said, but I believed what I wanted, and now my realization was quite different. I was not an old man, and Cade was not too young for me. Turning around, looking at the display, I had to do something to get away from Austin, so I sauntered into the area where there was a display of mugs with stuffed animals inside. My eyes scanned the shelf, and it landed on a teddy bear, and then the mug that said Cade loves Gray. My heart broke. He'd been thinking of me all along. I picked up the teddy bear. It was the cutest stuffed animal, and it reminded me of Cade because of the expression and eyes. Strolling up to the counter, a young man who looked to be 18 said, "You've picked the most expensive gift in the store. I bought my girlfriend one and sent it to her on her birthday. She loved it. I'm sure your girl will love it too." After paying him, he reached for a bag. I pointed to a special-looking bag. How much is that one over there and the coffee? It's expensive. Do I look like I can't afford that expensive bag with the gold and pink trim? His eyes measured me from my head to my shoes. I'd say that whoever gets your gift will be A. I stopped him in the middle of telling me how much my girlfriend would like the little token of my appreciation. A happy man. Is that what you wanted to say? No. But that too. He glanced at me as I turned with two bags in my hand, one containing the bear, and the other held the special blended coffee, and I strode in Caden's direction.